Ladies and gentlemen, nice to see you today. In this episode, we will talk about an important meeting between the leaders of the world's largest economies. What can this meeting change in the world order, and how can it affect the situation in Ukraine? That's what Henry Keane is all about.
In conditions where the war between Israel and Hamas further divides the world, which was already shocked by Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the mere fact of the meeting between the leaders of the US and China already gives reason for some cautious optimism. After a year of ignoring each other, at least publicly, Washington and Beijing started not only talking but also meeting face-to-face, and each side and everyone in the world clearly understands very well that the conflict between the two largest world economies is capable of destroying the international order already is shaky enough. Let us discuss the ins and outs of the meeting between Joe Biden and Xi Jinping a bit later. The leaders of the United States and China met on November 15th on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. Biden hosted Xi at the Paoli estate. Just by the way, many Hollywood films and series were filmed there. The legendary dynasty amongst those, for example, the estate is located almost 50 kilometers from San Francisco, where the summit took place. Biden and Xi Jinping greeted each other rather warmly outside. The mansion declined to take any questions from journalists and went inside. Then the White House announced the beginning of negotiations between two delegations headed by the US president and the Chinese leader. In his opening remarks, Biden said that competition should not turn into conflict and noted that he and Xi Jinping are tuned to, I quote, clearly understand each other as a leader without any misunderstandings. In response, the head of the People's Republic of China said that US-China relations over the past 50 years have not been smooth, but, I quote, continued to move forward. And he added that the world is big enough for both countries to be successful.
This time of year, about a year and a day ago, we met in Bali on the sidelines of the G20. Since then, key members of our teams have had important discussions on issues matters to both our nations and to the world. But as always, there is no substitute to face-to-face discussions. I've always found our discussions straightforward and frank, and I've always appreciated them. Mr. President, we know each other for a long time. We haven't always agreed, which was not a surprise to anyone, but our meetings have always been candid, straightforward, and useful. I've never doubted what you've told me in terms of your candid nature in which you speak. I value our conversation because I think it's paramount that you and I understand each other clearly, leader to leader, with no misconceptions or miscommunication. We have to ensure that competition does not veer into conflict, and we also have to manage it responsibly, that competition.
For two large countries like China, the United States turning their back on each other is not an option. It is unrealistic for one side to remodel the other. And conflict and confrontation has unbearable consequences for both sides. I'm still of the view that major country competition is not to the prevailing trend of current times and cannot solve the problems facing China and the United States or the world at large. Planet Earth is big enough for the two countries to succeed, and one country's success is an opportunity for the other. It is an objective fact that China and the United States are different in history, culture, social system, and development path. However, as long as they respect each other, coexist in peace, and pursue winning cooperation, they will be fully capable of rising above differences and find the right way for the two major countries to get along with each other. I firmly believe in the promising future of the bilateral relationship. Mr. President, you and I, we are at the helm of China-U.S. relations. We shoulder heavy responsibilities for the two peoples, for the world, and for history.
In response, the head of the People's Republic of China said that US-China relations over the past 50 years have not been smooth, but, I quote, continued to move forward. And he added that the world is big enough for both countries to be successful.
Our meetings have always been candid and straightforward. We haven't always agreed, but they've been straightforward. And today, build on the groundwork we laid over the past several months of high-level diplomacy between our teams. we've made some important progress, I believe.
If we see each other as the primary competitor, the most consequential challenge of geopolitics, and pressing threats, this will lead to misinformed policies, misguided actions, and unwanted results. China is ready to be a partner and friend of the United States. The fundamental principles that we follow in handling China-U.S. relations are mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation.
After that, a closed meeting began. After several hours, Joe Biden was first to come out to the journalists. He described the conversation with Xi Jinping as constructive and productive. He declared an agreement to restore the communication channels between the military of the two states, which were cut after the visit to Taiwan by the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, which was not coordinated with Beijing, which we will discuss later on. The parties agreed on cooperation in fighting against drugs, discussed the risks and security issues related to artificial intelligence. They also talked about Taiwan, of course. And they exchanged views on a number of regional and global issues, including Russia's refusal to stop its brutal and aggressive war against Ukraine, as well as the conflict in Gaza. At the press conference, Biden emphasized several times that he has known Xi for a long time. Since the time of his vice presidency, and held dozens of negotiations with him. Answering a question about his trust in Xi, Biden answered in Ronald Reagan's style, "I do trust, but I do verify." Xi spoke a little later. He appeared at a dinner with representatives of American business. The statements of the both leaders echoed those gave on the eve of closed-door talks, which, again, is quite a positive sign to all of us. Someone from the White House itself is with us tonight to answer the questions. Let's do that. Talk for more. Biden and Xi Jinping, the meeting, what's at stake?
Quite a lot at stake. The world's stability, if I say so. But at the beginning, the expectations were set quite low. And it's notable that these expectations have not only been met, but surpassed, as the two nations have committed to increasing their dialogue. That was the goal. And the fact that the initial expectations were so minimal, it definitely underscores the strained nature of U.S.-China relations. And the recent announcement made by the president regarding the agreement to resume military-to-military contact is significant, considering that such communications were severed last year following Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, prompting China to suspend talks as a form of retaliation, if I say so. Moreover, the two countries have agreed to collaborate on restricting the production and distribution of certain chemicals that are used in manufacturing of fentanyl. It's a big problem that affects not only the United States, but like China and bordering countries. And a government official has disclosed that China will actively target specific companies involved in producing these chemicals. So the discussions also covered a wide range of topics, including artificial intelligence, and the president highlighted that experts from both nations will convene to explore ways to mitigate the risks associated with the AI before they arise. So, long story short, the dialogue has been resumed, and the American side is hopes that both parties will be able to communicate on some certain continuing basis.
So, would you say, Mr. Komadovsky, that the existing tensions are somewhat released, it's eased, or so? What is the results are good or bad for the world?
Ultimately, the core of this development between China and the U.S. is the agreement for both countries to engage in continuous dialogue.
Right.
And President Biden certainly expressed confidence in his ability to directly communicate with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, emphasizing the importance of establishing some points of contact between these two global superpowers.
Sure.
And despite disagreements in issues such as Taiwan, such as the South China Sea, fostering communications is crucial to prevent competition or misunderstandings from escalating into conflict. We want a competition, but we don't want a conflict. This is a bottom line of the American message that President Biden was trying to send to his Chinese counterpart.
So he did succeed with that, do you think, in sending that message to the world quite loud and clear?
Well, it's too soon to predict.
Right. Okay.
But we've seen some indication that America and China have already broke the ice, and some new, for instance, like
True.
it might seem a bit funny, but some news reports indicate that President Xi conveyed to President Biden that China will send new pandas to the United States, notably some of the most famous residents of the zoo here in Washington,
Right.
D.C., namely pandas like Mei Xian, Tian Tian, and Xiao Qi Ji, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow,
They
you're doing
were
great.
returned to China recently, and that was like the first time that the American capital is without these iconic black and white bears, and we know China is known to use pandas as a diplomacy tool, and Xi Jinping described those new incoming pandas as
Right.
envoys or messengers of friendship between the Chinese and American people. So, certainly we are able to see some certain development between, like, from the diplomatic standpoint, between Beijing and Washington.
This is the cutest diplomacy possible. I mean, the panda diplomacy it is. But what exactly do the parties want?
fluffy for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but what exactly do the parties want from each other? Not just panda bears, right? What does the United States want from China and otherwise?
The United States wants to keep the communication lines open, as I said before. So it's important, and President Biden emphasized multiple times that for him it's important, and this point has been achieved already, that he can just take the phone, call President Xi to convey his concerns or his crucial points, and then, like, he's going to be heard. So before that, like, since for 2 years, almost 2 years in a row, those lines of communications were not used at all. And certainly two superpowers in the world, they have to communicate to avoid those sharp edges. And frankly, the White House was setting the bar and the expectations for this round of negotiations super low, and as I said, like, that level was not only met, but it was surpassed. Since
okay. I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And the goal number one is to keep talking. And senior White House official told me, one of the senior White House officials told me that one of the goals of this meeting is to start conducting future meetings on the high level, on the level of the of the foreign ministries and the Department of State, so that the dialogue keeps rolling. And that's important for Chinese counterparts to be heard, and it's important for the American diplomats to convey their concerns, and thus both parties can look for solutions that will affect the entire world. Because as President Xi emphasized, the bilateral relations between China and the U.S., those relations are one of the most, if not the most important bilateral relations in the world.
That is absolutely true. I agree with you. But the rolling dialogue is calling President Xi a dictator for the second time in a row is a bit too much, or this is the part of a dialogue?
Well, President Biden was asked certainly if he would still call President Xi a dictator, and he did do so, and for sure. But then he explained himself. He said that the political system in China differs from the American political system, and given those technicalities and those descriptions, President Xi might fit into the term of a dictator. We haven't heard from the from the Chinese side yet. Or their reaction is still to be heard. But in general, before this statement was made, both sides they expressed willingness to sit down at the table together and to work on a variety of issues, global issues that will affect not only the U.S. but China as well. So we'll see. Some experts hope that this is gonna start. This is gonna be a great start to a bigger, broader dialogue that will bring some results in the nearest future.
Well, Misha, don't get me wrong. I absolutely feel you. I understand what you mean, and I agree with you. But maybe this is not the best way to roll the dialogue and to, you know what I mean, to call out someone who just left the table a dictator in any sense, and not explaining yourself in the way that it might be understood by the other party in some wrong way. But there is a dialogue, and it is certainly good for the world. But let me ask you another question about Ukraine. What is most important for Ukraine from what was said during the meeting between President Xi and Joseph Biden?
Well, first of all, the United States considers China as some certain leverage to put pressure on Russia, since Beijing and Moscow are as close as never before, some experts can say. And President Biden and members of his administration, they emphasize that Ukrainian topic and the topic of the war of Russia in Ukraine will be discussed at the table. But at the same time, if we dive into the deliverables, we haven't seen or haven't heard any drastic change in China's rhetoric regarding Ukraine and regarding the war. They don't call the war, they call it like a conflict or a crisis, but not the war. And they claim that they're not siding with any of the participants of this war, either with Ukraine or with Russia. But at the same time, as was predicted before by analysts, this meeting did not bring like a significant shift in terms of regulating and putting pressure on Russia, on the Kremlin more. Certainly, lots of things were left behind the closed doors, since like the public portion of this meeting was quite restricted. It was like this. We could see only like, and we could hear only opening remarks made by two presidents. We have to see in the future what statements will be made by the Chinese, by the Americans, and certainly, like recently, the State Department emphasized again, reiterated the message that like nothing about Ukraine is discussed without Ukraine. And literally a couple of days ago, the head of the Ukrainian president's office, Andriy Yermak, was visiting Washington, and he had multiple meetings, including the meeting with Secretary Blinken. And I'm sure that those upcoming talks with President Xi and with the Chinese delegation, in terms of ending the war in Ukraine, were discussed, but once again behind the closed doors.
Thank you very much. My hand shakes.
Watch this.
The summit was the second meeting between Biden and Xi in person as leaders of the countries, and it took place a year after the negotiations on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Bali, Indonesia. Xi has not been in the United States since April 2017. At that time, he was hosted by President Donald Trump in Florida, and the very next year, 2018, relations between China and the United States found themselves at the lowest point since like ever. Both Chinese and American high-ranking officials spoke openly about this. Actually, I love when high-ranking officials are giving obvious things with such a face as they've invented time machine, no less. But anyway, the two superpowers have broken enough spears during the time a previous owner of the White House, Donald Trump, reigned. Joe Biden's predecessor unleashed the real tariff war, no less, against China, and he sought to reduce the huge, almost $200 billion deficit in bilateral trade and bring jobs back to America. Both countries went into a tariff race, taxing more and more different groups of each other's goods. Maybe, at a short term, it looked good for the respective economies. However, at the same time, political trust was undermined. The United States President Joe Biden shared his expectations with journalists on the eve of the talks. However, at the same time, political trust was undermined. The US President Joe Biden shared his expectations with journalists on the eve of the talks.
To get back on a normal course of corresponding, being able to pick up the phone and talk to one another if there's a crisis, being able to make sure our military still have contact with one another. We can't take, as I told you, we're not trying to decouple from China. But what we're trying to do is change the relationship for the better.
Well, let us look back over the shoulder a little bit. The coming to power of the Biden administration was met by Beijing with cautious expectations for the best. However, the COVID-19 pandemic became an obstacle to any personal contacts, due to which the president of the Republic of China, Xi Jinping, neither traveled around the world nor hosted anyone until the summer of last year. He communicated exclusively by phone or video call. Washington signaled to Beijing that it was ready to be friends. Still, Beijing continued to criticize the Americans and treated those signals of new US administration with great caution, and in a very Chinese manner, he waited and expected further developments. Ultimately, by midsummer 2022, Biden held several phone and video talks with Xi Jinping. Communication between the two countries' departments was somewhat restored, and the US State Department and the Chinese Foreign Ministry finally began preparations for a meeting of leaders at the nearest international forum, where first they were both expected to attend the G20 summit in Bali, in Indonesia. And then, in early August, the Speaker of the House of Representatives of the US Congress, Nancy Pelosi, visits Taiwan as a part of her tour of Asian countries. It was a wow and oops in one go. Before that, Beijing signaled to Washington through all available channels that with such a visit, the US was about to cross a thin red line and go very beyond the limits of what is permitted. Chinese leader Xi Jinping said, I quote, "Those who play with fire will die from it. There is hope that the US will clearly understand this." What a tone, huh? The Chinese leader, during a phone call, asked the President of the United States to find a way to prevent the visit. Biden, in turn, replied to Xi Jinping that he had no right, and actually no power, to force Pelosi to cancel the trip because she, like other members of the US Congress, can independently make decisions about her foreign visits. The Washington Post reported, citing sources in the White House, in other words, sorry, that's how freedom works. The dragon was enraged. Beijing conducted large-scale military exercises all around Taiwan, launching ballistic missiles literally over the island and halting all high-level communications with Washington. At least those were aware. The dragon was enraged. Beijing conducted large-scale military exercises all around Taiwan, launching ballistic missiles literally over the island and halting all high-level communications with Washington. At least those we are aware about. Even a new Chinese ambassador to the USA was not appointed. However, tensions eased last November when US and Chinese leaders Joe Biden and Xi Jinping met at the G20 summit in Indonesia and promised to talk for more between the respective parties. It seemed that the incident with Pelosi's trip to Taiwan was finally over and the world could move on. According to Biden's agreement with Xi, the start of normalization was supposed to be the visit of the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Beijing in February this year, but it never happened, since the American military managed to shoot down a Chinese balloon that was allegedly conducting surveillance of objects on the territory of the United States. China insisted that the downed balloon was a quoted an unmanned civilian airship and that his entry into US airspace was caused by force majeure. Right, the force majeure balloon. I wonder maybe Ellie was returning to Kansas. Who knows? This way or another, in the end, in June, the head of American diplomacy did fly to China. The United States and the People's Republic of China agreed to try to stabilize their active rivalry in order to prevent a slide into the conflict. And although a significant breakthrough was announced, the Chinese Foreign Ministry called the visit of the US Secretary of State, I quote, a new beginning. But literally just a day after Blinken's trip ended, Joe Biden calls Xi Jinping a dictator when he mentions the Chinese leader's reaction to the US downed balloon. A new beginning indeed, but beginning of what exactly? Chinese reaction did not take long. Beijing called Biden's words a political provocation.
Irrelevant remarks by the US side are extremely ridiculous and irresponsible. They seriously violate basic facts, diplomatic protocol, and China's political dignity. China is strongly dissatisfied with and firmly opposed to this.
This way or another, Biden didn't look quite impressed, if at all, throwing out a joke about the fact that relations between the United States and China are collapsing and highly appreciating Blinken's visit to Beijing. And finally, the Pentagon's worms did say that the broken balloon did not fly over the United States anytime soon. This alliance of heads of power, as well as the Asia-Pacific Economic Union itself, is unlikely to imply the persistence of the world's two largest economies. This is a signal to the world that Biden and Xi want to maintain ties regardless of economic problems, extensive sanctions, and food in order to avoid Taiwan's future share. Officials of both powers have been actively trying to overcome the broad idea that the United States and China are more competitors than adversaries. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, writing for Foreign Affairs, called the countries, I quote, economically mutually dependent. And US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warned the economic division has significant global consequences.
The United States has no desire to decouple from China. A full separation of our economies would be economically disastrous for both of our countries and for the world. We seek a healthy economic relationship with China that benefits both countries over time.
Last month, the dragon spoke. Xi Jinping himself told the American congressional delegation that there are 1,000 reasons to make the US and China's supplies the fastest and to make them the most profitable. And now let us talk about the cutest diplomacy there is, Panda diplomacy. Yes, cuteness is, if not a weapon, then a tool of diplomacy, for sure. A tool of Chinese public diplomacy that it uses to improve relations with foreign powers or to put pressure on them. Beijing has a monopoly on all pandas in the world, does not sell these cute creatures, but rents them out for a fee. And now China does not intend to continue lease agreements with zoos in the United States. The reason for the departure of pandas from the American zoos is said to be a decline in diplomatic relations between China and the United States. The first couple of bamboo bears arrived in Washington in 1972, following US President Richard Nixon's historical visit to China. At the beginning of November, the 50-year of China goodwill dating back to the Cold War expired. 3 pandas that lived in the Smithsonian Zoo in Washington returned to their homeland. Bamboo bears left the United States on a special flight. But just imagine a private jet full of panda, like super cute. Some of the fans of these animals did not have time to say goodbye. The American media, right? People flew to Washington from other cities to see the panda one last time before they are leaving for Asia. The meeting between Biden and Xi also leaves hopes for the return of these cuties. Next, let us talk about Ukraine in direct regard to the negotiations between Biden and Xi. Official Kyiv is interested in a positive outcome of the meeting between the leaders of the US and China. To be frank, without at least mutual understanding between Washington and Beijing, we should not expect a change in China's attitude towards Russia and its aggression against Ukraine. A number of Ukrainian experts said that they do not really expect any breakthroughs from this meeting, neither globally nor in those issues that concern Ukraine directly. After all, Washington and Beijing have fundamental differences in the assessment of the causes of the war between Russia and Ukraine and the conditions for its termination. However, the very fact of the meeting and continuation of the constructive negotiation process between the United States and China is quite a positive for Ukraine, of course. A direct military political confrontation between the United States and the People's Republic of China is against Ukrainian interests and would be beneficial to, yes, Russia and other staunch opponents of the United States. Although China officially maintains a position of neutrality regarding the war in Ukraine, the mass media have repeatedly written on its military cooperation with the Russian Federation. So, back in July 2022, the Wall Street Journal wrote that in the first 5 months, China's supply of microchips to Russia doubled, and the export of aluminium oxide, which is necessary for the production of metallic aluminium and the production of weapons, increased 400 times. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China has repeatedly denied the supply of China's components and components for the production of weapons to Russia. A month ago, the Pentagon published a report stating that from March 2022 to 2023, Chinese companies exported drones and components to Russia worth for more than 12 million. In addition, China massively sold small arms and dual-purpose goods to the Russian Federation. It was established that both private and state enterprises of China participated in the procurement. Subsequently, the advisor of the US President, Jake Sullivan, said that China continues to refrain from supplying arms to Russia. At the same time, Washington warned Beijing that any assistance to the Russian defense industry could have serious consequences for China.
We are concerned that in spite of a sanctions program that we've put in place, that equipment that is critical to Russia's military effort is nevertheless evading sanctions and being delivered to Russia. And we are determined to do all that we can to stem this flow of material that aids Russia in conducting this brutal and illegal war. I stressed in our conversations that it's critical to us that companies not provide material support for Russia's defense industrial sector, and that we were prepared to put in place further sanctions, that we would like to see China crack down on this, especially when we are able to provide information.
At the end of October 22, the participants of the EU-US summit held in Washington called on China to use its influence on Russia to end its aggression against Ukraine and to enter into direct contact with the authorities of Ukraine to support just and lasting, stable post-war peace. Communication between Ukraine and China is not easy, but negotiations are currently underway to hold a meeting between the leaders of the two countries. This was announced not so long ago by the head of the office of the President of Ukraine, Andriy Yermak. Zelensky and Xi Jinping also had two phone conversations. According to Yermak, China is currently participating in the discussion of the peace formula in the level of ambassadors. However, there were no Chinese representatives in Malta. They sent an official message that they would not be able to participate. But still, I believe that they will participate in the peace formula, the head of the OP noted. We discuss things with the best of experts, diplomacy with the diplomats. Please meet Oleh Shamshur, Ukrainian diplomat, in this very studio.
Watch this.
The world wants to know, and we want to know. Xi Jinping meets Joseph Biden. What's at stake?
Actually, they met already. I think that the main purpose of the meeting was to ease tensions. The desire was manifested both by the Americans and the Chinese. And judging by the interview of the statement of Joe Biden and what has transpired into the press, that's actually what was achieved.
Achieved?
Yeah.
And so what's next?
I don't know. I think that the expectations of from the meeting were, I would say, minimalist. That's actually, the results were also minimal, but the results were as they were expected.
Right.
Concerning the re-establishment of the context between the military, that was very important. I think the creation of the working group on countering the trafficking of drugs mostly from China, precursor of for the production of fentanyl and amphetamine and other drugs. And the third, they decided to start again working on the climate change. That basically what we heard and what was more or less expected.
Well, I mean, it's not funny, but it's strange to hear issues like climate change when the political climate is cracking down all over the planet, and people are talking about the climate change. But Joe Biden and Xi Jinping met, and the results are good for Ukraine?
Well, I don't. Ukraine was, frankly speaking, it was not even mentioned neither during the press conference or press point of Biden, nor in the news.
Okay.
It was mentioned before that maybe they would evoke, meaning discuss briefly the situation in Ukraine and on the Middle East. It's not clear whether it was the case. I presume they did discuss it briefly, but I don't think that it was a major issue, Ukraine or the Middle East, for the meeting of Biden and Xi Jinping.
But anyway, what does it mean for Ukraine if the tension is released? It is good for Ukraine, or is it? I mean,
actually, I don't think that we might have expected even some positive moment because I stick to my belief that for the time being, China is definitely acting as an ally of Russia. It is interested in maintaining this relationship with Russia. It's interested in getting cheap natural resources, first of all, energy resources. It's interested in, I would say, distracting American attention from the situation in Asian Pacific region, as it is now paying a lot of attention to the situation in Ukraine now at the Middle East. Plus, if you add to that the ideological affinity, as far as we are speaking about dictatorships, and all put together explains why it's. I think it's unrealistic to expect that China would be even a honest broker in the war. They would definitely act as an ally of Russia as long as it suits Chinese interests.
And Chinese interests are cheap everything from Russia. Cheap oil, cheap...
as much as possible, use Russia in its confrontation with the West, and use Russia on the diplomatic stage, use Russia for achieving the interests of China to accomplish the action in the interest of China.
So, more or less clear what China wants from the United States. Did you strike attention, as you say? What does the United States want from the People's Republic of China?
Actually, at this stage, as I put it before, it's in the interest of the United States as well as of China to ease the tensions. And I think that the main motivation for Biden was exactly his involvement, engagement, his and that of the United States in the war between Ukraine and Russia, so countering Russian aggression, and also now the crisis at the Middle East, and definitely they find it, even in the United States, extremely difficult to act at all fronts. As far as China is concerned, I think that the main motivation was the fact that economic situation in China has worsened. It's weaker than it was before, and still reeling off the aftermath of the COVID-19 epidemics. Plus, Chinese leaders understand how difficult, how dangerous is the situation in near Taiwan and in the China Sea. So I don't think that they feel really prepared for open confrontation. So that's why they're also interested in easing the tension. Plus, they do understand that they need economic cooperation, investment from the United States and from the rest of the world.
Yeah, sure. I take that as an answer. I agree with you. But do you think that there is a realistic way that, for example, Joseph Biden administration says, okay, Taiwan is China?
No way. So he said again that they stick to the one China policy, meaning that only Chinese government represents the interest, represents Chinese states, so to say.
Right.
But at the same time, we are also only dealing with the respite intention because the contradiction, either strategic, geopolitical, or economic between two superpowers, is here to stay. That would define their relationship. But strangely, eerily enough, the meeting between Biden and Xi Jinping reminded me a bit the meetings between American or Western and Soviet leaders. So, in a sense, that there was a basic strategic and economic, I would say, difference and rivalry, but at the same time, they were clever enough not to get to the precipice, into the precipice. So they were interested to be near the precipice, to stay here, not to be off the cliff.
Well, I mean, is it not being a bit off the cliff, calling Chinese leader a dictator for the second time in a row?
There was a rather stern direction from the spokesperson in China. But at the same time, it shows again that there is a basic difference. It's not going to fade away. It would remain.
Of course.
We will see the rise in tension, then it will subside, but that would be more or less for the foreseeable future like that.
Xi Jinping met Putin. Then Xi Jinping meets Joseph Biden. What does it mean for Ukraine?
As I said, it doesn't mean much because the meetings neither with Biden nor with Putin does not change the attitude of China towards the war. Its desire, its necessity to support Russia at this stage.
Right.
But speaking maybe more really about Biden. What is the danger in meeting Putin? That he might be, I would say, asking China for more help.
For more help, right.
But then again, the readiness of China to provide this help, including there was a lot of talk about the possibility of the delivery of Chinese arms, would depend on the appreciation of the situation, but the Chinese, not by Putin. So far, it's not happening, but China is definitely playing a major role, maybe a decisive role, in keeping Russian economy afloat, firstly. And secondly, from time to time, we know about the delivery of spare parts, electronics to Russia, and it plays a very important part in the military production in Russia.
So Ukraine is more like an observer of the situation. It cannot influence the situation in any way.
It would be really, I would say, I would be happy to see that Ukraine is able to influence the situation. But unfortunately, the weight of China is such that there is very little chance to flex, to influence, even in a small way, the position of China. It might happen, but only when China decides that it doesn't suit
Chinese interest.
Chinese interests
Right.
to continue unlimited support of Russia.
Unlimited support of Russia. What would you do to stop unlimited support if you would be a person who can do that? What would you do? Let's speculate on that.
Actually, I don't think that even if I have those supernatural powers, I would be able
So
to
it
do
takes supernatural power.
to do that, because China it's really in Chinese interest to support Russia
Okay.
at this stage, and I wouldn't even try to open the eyes of the Chinese leaders to the situation. I presume they have very good assessment, appreciation of the situation, and they act as they feel fit for the country which is dictatorship and which pursues its own national narrow interests.
So you say dictatorship. That means national interests coincide with interests of dictators. Is that-
Yes. So meaning maybe it's, I would say even it would be more just to say not the national interest, because I do believe that China might fare much better as a democratic state, but as soon as the interest of this communist dictatorship, that's exactly
That
the
is
case.
exactly the case.
Yeah.
So do you believe there are tensions between the, subterranean tensions between the nation, the Chinese nation, and the Communist Party?
Well, at this stage, there was a kind of the covenant, as it was, for example,
Right.
in Putin's Russia. So you do not meddle in politics. We assure the growing standard of living. That's
Okay.
that was happening. So I think that the major there are two major threats. I'm not sinologist, but according to my view, two major threats. If a Chinese economy starts to falter, and it might start to falter even when there would be a growth, but not a big one, because we are speaking about a very big
right.
economy.
Yeah, sure.
And secondly, still not visible, but still lingering interregional and interethnic contradictions that do exist in China.
Yes, and but that always was the case, and it always will be.
That was always the case.
Yes.
Xi Jinping, maybe Deng Xiaoping even more. He was the architect of the Chinese model. They managed to quell the contradictions by proposing this social covenant,
Right,
the
right,
standard of living, which was rising for a period of time. But is it sustainable? Would it be sustainable all the time? We shall see.
Do you believe that Xi Jinping is an absolute dictator of China?
Oh, yes. So, and before, I would say it was a model when dictator was chosen and was replaced from...
Before him.
So, two times that was
Right.
the tenure, and then the
Right,
dictator was supposed to be replaced by someone else. But Xi Jinping changed the rules of the game, and now he's dictator for life, I think.
The same way as Putin.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, but Xi Jinping is trying to mediate the conflicts like Israel and Hamas, Ukraine and Russia. I know this is the curtain, nothing else, but I think this is dangerous. But is it dangerous?
Well, I would say that's, I would say, I would put it like this, it's useless. So the Chinese leadership and China tries to play and maybe to augment its role as a respectable major player of international politics, as non-partisan force.
Absolutely.
But they, I would say, in both war in Ukraine and this conflict at the Middle East, they pretend
Yeah, sure.
to make efforts to be a mediator, but it's only a pretense. Still, their interest there in Ukraine, I have already spoken, there are some indications that they are not so non-partisan at the Middle East.
Absolutely right.
And surreptitiously, I would say, supporting the forces related to Hamas, for example, Iran.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Xi Jinping is talking to Israel officials or Hamas officials and knowing anything about. I know everyone knows it is a pretext, but should really is it dangerous for the world if he succeeds, for example?
So the China is, with the advent of Xi Jinping, they are actually aggressively pursuing the policy of remodeling the system of international relations, and all the areas, all the facts we have been spoken before. It's only, I would say, the tools for impose on the international relations, the Chinese influence, and to remodel the system from the liberal order to the order,
dictatorship.
To the order based on the dominance of the authoritarian regimes like China.
So do you think this is going to happen?
I hope not.
All right. Well, I mean, in terms of hope, I don't. I mean, I hope not too. But do you think this is the?
It's in a way. I'm sorry for interrupting. It's in a way as the situation in the war against Russian aggression. There is no third way. Either we win, and the democratic world wins, or even if Putin manages to realize even the part of his plan, that would have devastating results for Ukraine and for democratic world as well. In the sense that we have to win, we must win, just to survive. And to the same extent, I think that the democracies, the community of democracies, should definitely be resilient enough to confront, to counter the efforts of the authoritarian world to impose its vision of the international relations. And a big question is not simply, say, authoritarian regimes, the axis of evil and the community of democracies. They are well defined and their interests are quite clear. A big battlefield is so-called global South.
The global South.
At this stage, it's still very much undecided. And we see that in the attitude of the global South towards the war in Ukraine. So it's actually, if we can follow the words from the Lord of the Rings, the battle for the global South has only begun.
Okay, let's see what is happening. We are the parts of this world. We are also living on this planet. I hope no dictator will go nuclear.
Sure, but at the same time, many people are in the West. They are speaking about the danger of the possibility of the use of the nuclear arms by Putin. I always say, actually, it makes no sense to cede to the bluff, to the blackmail of Putin. It would be much wiser, much more practical to start, if they are not in existence, to start to write up the contingency plan. How you act in this situation.
Absolutely, I agree with you. But do you believe that if more or less Putin and Xi Jinping are more or less the same, they are both dictators, they're both autocrats, and they both pursue their own interests without any care? If Putin dies tomorrow, do you think anything will change will be of change in Russia and the same way in China?
I do not believe. I said again, I'm not a sinologist, so it's more difficult for me to say what will happen in China.
Okay.
And it's a big country. It's a country of more than 1 billion individuals. Difficult to predict. At the same time, unfortunately, I'm not sure that the demise, the death of Putin, would immediately change the situation in Russia, because the problem we're facing is more than Putin. It's actually the problem of Russia itself, of the Russian mentality, of their attitude towards Ukraine and towards the West. So it would take, I'm afraid, much more time than simply getting Putin packed in the coffin.
Okay, back into the coffin, you said.
Packed in the coffin.
Back into, so, you know,
No.
rising from dead.
Actually,
that might be a good idea,
it's
wasn't
a
it?
good idea, but I'm speaking about packed.
But, all right, why don't they just, maybe they were discussing, you know, how to split Russia between each other. Two major economies, two major powers of the world. Let's keep Russia for herself and end the war finally.
Definitely it was not on the mind of Joe Biden. China, frankly speaking, might have had or might have this idea, but this is the idea for the future. And from time to time, China reminds Russia that they do not, they didn't or haven't forgotten the territorial disputes or the territory that was expropriated. That's a vast territory. It's, we are speaking about the territory tantamount to the territory of, if I'm not mistaken, France and Germany combined. That was expropriated by Russia in the 19th century. And publication of recently of the map with one of the Russian islands. It's only the beginning. On the map shows that definitely it's not the marriage of love. It's marriage of convenience.
So Putin must be afraid of China.
Maybe even not so Putin as Russia, but at the same time, if you look at that, it's looking really grotesque. As there is an important current in the Russian political thought. They emerged only recently, which says that we were the satellites of the Golden Horde before. Maybe now it would be good for Russia to be satellite of China. Which is, I think, which is bizarre.
It is bizarre, but I mean, everything that I can remember the last years about Russia is a little bit bizarre. So is the results of the meeting of the Xi Jinping and Biden are more or less clear in terms of integration of Ukraine. What about Russia?
I don't think that they even broached the topic of Russia. You mean Russia's attitude to
what happened to the result?
I don't think that they are really rejoicing this meeting.
I hope so.
Because I think that understandably one of the, I would say, factors that is cementing this alliance of no limits between two countries is the rejection of the West, the rejection of the United States.
Right. And
definitely, I would say objectively, Putin regime might be interested in exacerbating those tensions between China and the United States.
Surely, absolutely.
I don't think that he was really happy about this meeting.
Your Excellency, do you believe that there is a possibility between open confrontation, let's call spade, a war between China and the United States?
Well, this issue has been discussed for quite some time. It has its proponents and opponents, ups and downs. I would say, although I'm not an active diplomat, I would say diplomatically, it's not impossible.
It is not impossible.
It's not impossible, and strange enough, I would say that it would. I don't see the United States as someone or as the state or the force that is provoking this conflict. I might imagine the action on the part of China, and it may be motivated by two, I would say, totally opposite factors. If China is becoming strong enough, much stronger, or it is as strong as Xi Jinping wants it to become, he was establishing or defining the year of action as 2027, when China should be ready to take over Taiwan. It was
To
mentioned.
take over what? The planet? The world?
Over Taiwan. So
Over Taiwan.
it's
All right,
possible.
okay.
On the other hand, if the regime is becoming weaker, it might be also effective for him, as for many dictators, to compensate internal weakness by external aggressiveness.
This external aggressiveness can be also a mistake, but it can anyway take place.
Yeah.
So in 2027, you could actually, Xi Jinping, as a dictator, can decide to take Taiwan.
So actually, I would say that, of course, he cares a lot about China as he sees China.
Exactly what I
China's
meant.
destiny. But I think that even as Putin, he is much more interested in his own survival.
Well, exactly. I mean, Xi Jinping thinks he is China.
Yeah.
Exactly the same.
As Putin
thinks
sees
he is Russia.
Yeah, and it was said that Russia means Putin, which is absurd, but that's...
It is absurd, absolutely.
Now it's maybe even not as absurd as in principle, but definitely it's not, it shouldn't be the case.
Thank you very much for your time and for your expertise. I hope to talk. I have a lot of questions, but we just don't have enough time for that.
Thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
There are a lot to discuss, a lot to talk for more. The world is shaky. What happened and what happens? Let's us talk for more next time. Thank you so very much. Panda.